Okay, well, we're going to talk about one of our favorite things as Americans to do. If you're not an American, this doesn't apply to you at all. Just kidding, that's a joke. Who here in the last month has had serious worry or anxiety about anything? And then the last month? I feel like I see some hands that aren't being raised. And I don't want to imply that you're not being truthful, but you're probably not being truthful. Who here has had worry or anxiety in the last month? How about week? Day, maybe? If you're a little smaller amount of hands there for a little bit. Look, the thing is, in America, it's kind of like the thing to do to find something to worry about or be anxious about, the next big thing. I feel like it's almost comical how many things we really get anxious about, like we really worry about. I mean, obviously there's the future. I mean, we worry about the future. Who doesn't worry about their future to some extent? Family, money, right? Finances, cars. This one's really good. You ever worried about your favorite sports team doing well? I was watching tennis last night, and I was really anxious that my favorite tennis player would lose, and he did. I was bent out of shape. My Djokovic lost. You guys relate here? There's so much we worry about. It's like I feel like in America, it's irresponsible not to be worried about something. You know, if you're not worried about something, well, you're just lazy. Can you guys relate with me here? I mean, just look at your own lives. Is worry a big thing? Because if it's not, you're no good American. How does, just take a step back and look at your life. Whenever you have something that you're really worried about, whatever kind of hard situation that you're worried or anxious about, how does it affect you? How do you deal with it? Because for me, I'll tell you how I deal with it. Usually it's finances for me. Usually it's finances. I grew up in a family that was in the ministry full time, and it seems like whenever you're in the ministry, it's kind of you end up having to rely on God for your finances a lot of the time, which is a real drag. My wife and I have been missionaries for the last 3 years over in Texas, and you end up relying on God for your finances quite a bit. And man, I would look at our finances every month or so, and I would see, oh, good, we're $500 behind on this, or we're no way we're going to meet our bills for this month. And my automatic reaction is to get kind of crippled, if that makes sense. I would be so overwhelmed with all this stuff that literally, and you can ask my wife, I would just kind of lay on the couch, unable to move or be happy, or I can't even watch TV. I'm so sad about our finances. Can any of you relate with that? Like being so overwhelmed with worry that you're just like, can't do anything. And it's not just me. I mean, we're talking about days at a time where I would be seriously messed up over worry. And again, it's not just me. I would take my wife, who's always in such a good, happy mood, and I would drag her down into the doldrums with me. Are you guys relating with what I'm saying at all? This whole anxiousness thing, for me, my tendency when I'm hit with something that I'm really seriously worried about, I just get knocked out. And I knock everyone else out with me. It's like a domino effect. Like, here I go, and I'm taking you all down with me. It seems like worry has a serious effect on us, for better or worse. Now, I want to tell you about a fellow who had a bit of a hard lot in life. He had a pretty difficult life, about as difficult as they come. And his name was Paul, and not that guy. He's had a hard life, but not like this Paul. This is a biblical Paul. You know what I'm talking about? The Apostle Paul, that guy who wrote most of the New Testament. He's all in the Bible. He actually, if you look at his life, just reading through the book of Acts and how he describes his own life in 2 Corinthians, he had a really hard time. He was a missionary really before there were a lot of missionaries on the earth, and he would go from town to all these places that had never heard the gospel, and he would preach it to them. He'd go into the synagogues where the Jews would meet, and he would say, this is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Here's Jesus Christ, and he would preach the gospel. And he was rejected. He was rejected constantly. He was thrown out. He was beaten. They'd just get really mad and go, nuh-uh, and they'd just beat him with rods. He was arrested unjustly, thrown into prison. One time he was actually dragged outside of the city and stoned. And if you know anything about being stoned, by the time they're finished, you're dead. I mean, they take rocks and they pelt you with them until you're no longer moving. And so they pelted Paul with rocks until he was no longer moving. And they go, oh, we killed him. And they walk away. And then a little bit later, Paul gets up and stumbles back into the city. He was shipwrecked, trying to, make his way around the world. And this kind of culminates, we're going to look at his life. He was accused of crimes he did not commit, dragged all the way to Rome, the capital, so thousands of miles away to a land he's never been to before, imprisoned, and waited until he was going to be executed or released. He didn't know which. And he's sitting there imprisoned, and he's waiting to find out if he's going to lose his life or not for crimes he didn't commit. Again, just read over the series of this poor guy's life, starting in Acts 9 or so. He had a really, really hard in life. You can't really get around it. And what we're going to look at is, again, his situation. He's imprisoned, and he's waiting to find out if he's going to be killed or not. So pretty much kind of one of the cruddier situations you can be in, waiting to find if you're going to be executed. Do I get to keep my head, or do I lose it? And he writes this letter to a church that he was very close with, up in Philippi, this place in Macedonia that he had been to a couple times before. He was very close to them. He writes this letter to them, and you'd almost expect this to be like, Paul's final words, his will to the church, pray for me, brothers, learn from my example, don't live a life like mine, it was really hard, and Lord, deliver me from this. It's kind of what you'd expect. He's literally sitting, waiting to find out if he's going to be killed or not. And yet, has anyone here read the letter to the Philippians? The letter is maybe, arguably, the most encouraging, joy-filled letter in the entire Bible. And again, he writes this imprisoned, just kind of as low as you can be, waiting to find out if he's going to lose his life or not for crimes he didn't commit. And he writes probably the most encouraging letter in the entire Bible. How does that work? Now, I don't want you to disconnect the reality of the situation just because he's a Bible character, because the fact of the matter is Paul was a real guy who just happened to be there at the beginning of this whole thing called Christianity. And so put yourself in this situation. Traveling around to different places, rejected, beaten, stoned, shipwrecked, imprisoned, and you're sitting imprisoned after all this stuff has happened to you, and you're waiting to find out if you're going to lose your life or not. How would you handle it? Because let me tell you, if I'm crippled over my financial stuff for each month, I don't think I'd be able to handle sitting in a prison too very well. And yet Paul has this incredible, again, if you haven't read Philippians, you just read it. Read it with the knowledge that he's sitting in a prison waiting to find out if he's going to be killed or not. He's so full of joy, and he's encouraging these guys, and he's got a peace that's so beyond his circumstances. You read his attitude, and he's got a peace and a joy that is not even tied to the situation that he's in. It's beyond that. He says in Philippians chapter 4, and again, he's talking to the church in Philippi, I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. He's sitting in a prison, waiting to be killed, essentially. He says, I've learned how to be content in every situation. And the whole letter is just full of joy. And then again, you can take this one of two ways. You can say, that's great for the imaginary, magical Bible creature. Or you can say, here's a real guy. How was he able to react like this? Was he delusional? Did he not get that he was about to lose his life? Or maybe was there something that he got that we don't get? So the question I want to pose to you, all of us here this morning, is can we get there as well? Can we get there? Can we get to where Paul got? He said, I've learned the secret. I've learned how to do this, to be content in every situation. So just realistically, I'm asking the question, can we get to that point? Is it an incredibly impossible goal? Here's a nice standard for you to meet. You'll never get there, but at least you can compare yourself to it. Or can we actually get there? Can we get to the point that when difficulties hit us out of nowhere, when our finances flip over on their belly, when health problems arise, when your car breaks down, can we get to the point that we have a peace and a joy that is so deeply rooted in us that those things just don't even faze it? Can we? Really? It's easy to say, yeah. But it's not easy to say, I can actually do that, and I'm going to try to get there. So let me suggest, Christ came to earth and he preached life as it was meant to be. He said, true, abundant life. That's the heart of the gospel. He said, this is how you should live. The question is, did God intend us? Does he design us to, whenever these difficulties hit out of nowhere, to be crippled by anxiety and worry, to be overwhelmed, to lay on a couch for 3 days, unable to have any kind of enjoyment or peace, to drag everyone down with you? Is that just the inevitability? Is that just the way it is? Or is there really something better? Let me suggest to all of us here this morning that there is something better. That anxiety and crippling worry is not only not what we were designed for, but it's absolutely destructive. It's just hurtful. It's not even the tiniest bit helpful. It just hurts. Let me suggest that we can actually get to where Paul got. Really, in real life, get to the place that Paul was at, where he had a joy that was at the very roots of his life, a peace that was so unshakable that no situation could mess with it. And let me suggest that walking in these situations in peace and joy, as opposed to crippling worry and anxiety, is infinitely superior. And so it's really all nice and well to say all this stuff, but it doesn't mean anything if we can't really aim towards it, you know? You ever had a principle thrown out to you and you're like, well, that's great, I should really apply that to my life. Too bad I don't have any idea how. It's like given all the pieces to build a swing set, and you're like, yeah, this should look like that. I don't know how to. I should get some instructions. I'm actually going to present, at least the way Paul handled it. I'm going to present the way Paul handled his situation and just give a very practical concept. Suggest that maybe this is how Paul got to where he was at. And really, it's extremely practical. So again, just to reiterate, so we're all tracking, we're looking at the idea of peace and joy regardless of our situations and circumstances, as opposed to crippling worry and anxiety, which seems to be the norm. Again, in America, you're worried about something. If you're not, you better find what you should be worried about and start. So really, and this is the way Paul handled this thing. It's about your focus and your perspective. I'll say it again. It's about your focus and your perspective when you're in that situation. No, just think here. Think out of the box for a second. When you're in that situation, whatever situation, just think to the last time that you were just overwhelmed by worry or anxiety or whatever. Small thing, big thing, whatever. How does it work out for you when you stick your blinders on and you're just looking at the situation, everything negative and everything that could go wrong and is going wrong and everything? When you're looking just at that stuff, how does it work for you? Because again, I'll tell you how it works for me when I look at my finances and I put the blinders on and I'm looking at my finances and oh my gosh, we're not going to make it this month. I'm going to have to sell this, or I'm not going to make it. I can't provide for my family. What are we going to do? We're going to be on the streets. I tell you, I get crippled. And again, that's really the best word I can think of. Crippled, debilitated, knocked out. Why is that? Why does it seem like you have such a bad reaction when you're looking only at that stuff, when you're focusing on everything negative about a situation? Well, very simply, human beings have these things called emotions, which emotions are the best thing ever, and they're also the worst thing ever. You know what I mean. The thing about emotions, and this is just basic, the nature of man stuff. Here's the thing about emotions. They react to whatever you are focusing on. And I'm not giving you like a motivational speech. That's just the way emotions work. If you're watching a video that's really heartbreaking, you're going to have sad emotions, right? If you're watching, like, I don't know, you know what I'm saying here. Whatever you're focusing on, that's what your emotions react to, for better or worse. So very simply, if I'm sitting there looking at my finances and all I'm looking at are the worst parts of it, everything terrible about it, all I can see is that, of course I'm going to be knocked out for days at a time. Your emotions very strongly affect your state of being. That's just a fact of reality. So how did Paul do it? If Paul's so great, what was his focus? He gives us an idea in chapter 1 of this letter to the Philippians. He says, I want you to know, and again, he's talking to the church in Philippi, I want you to know that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Most of my fellow Christians here have become more confident in the Lord by my imprisonment and are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Now again, he's in prison and he's waiting on his impending death. Are there not like 1,000 things he could be freaking out about right now? What's his focus on in his situation? He says, I want you to know that what's happened to me, my situation, is advancing the gospel. That the people around me are being emboldened by my faith here in imprisonment. Where are his eyes in the situation? It seems like he's almost going out of his way to find the good things that are coming out of where he's at. You guys see that? I want you to know that what's happened to me has really done this. It seems so bad right now. But what's happened to me, here's some good stuff that's been coming out of this. His eyes seem to be really focused on that stuff. It seems like, again, there's so much you could be worried about, but his focus is not on all that stuff. And so he's learned how to manage his emotions to keep himself from spiraling and crashing and being knocked out for days at a time. It seems like he has a bigger picture. Makes sense? It's put your blinders on and you look at the fact that you're sitting imprisoned, waiting on your impending death. Of course you're going to be messed up. But Paul has learned to take his blinders off and look at the whole thing. He's got a big picture, a bigger perspective. His eyes are not on everything terrible at the situation, but it seems like he's specifically focusing out the good. See what I'm saying there? And so really, you've got to ask yourself, how was he able to do that? Because it's not as easy as just saying, don't focus on the bad. It's just not. He actually gives us another idea here in Philippians. He says, and this comes off very much like a resolve. He says, I will rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice. See the double emphasis? I will rejoice. And he repeats it. It sounds like he's resolving himself. I will rejoice. And just do not marginalize the situation he's in. I can't think of any of us here who have been in a situation that hard. And he's saying, I will rejoice. And whatever he did seemed to work for him. His focus is not on the fact that he's sitting in a prison waiting on his death. His focus is on the big picture, and he says, I will rejoice. He's focusing on his blessings, and he's focusing on his incredibly good God who hasn't just left him where he's at. And it's about your perspective. because I've repeated this 100 times and I'll keep on repeating it. If your eyes are right here, and that's all you can see, and that's all you're taking in, and that's all your emotions are going to react to, so of course you're messed up. Of course you're bringing everybody around you down. Of course you're depressed and making foolish decisions out of your depression. And Paul takes the blinders off and looks at his whole life and the kingdom of God and considers his incredibly good God who is in the formula, no matter how bad it seems, and he says, I will rejoice. So the fact of the matter is that it's not just Paul who has this incredibly good God in the formula, but it's every single one of us. We have a God who is good to his very core, really good at a level that we can hardly understand here on earth. And even more, he cares intensely about every single one of us. And he cares intensely about every single one of our situations. The fact is, there is never, and I'll just really get this, there is never a time when you're going through something that God doesn't know about or care about. Never. There's no one on earth who loves you as much as God does. So think about the person who cares about you most and magnify that times, I don't know, something large. And it's so easy. And again, it's just so easy for us in the situation to let the negative emotions just take us away. We get so overwhelmed by this worry and anxiety we engulf ourselves in. Click on the emotions. And for me, no matter how wonderful my life is going, it's so easy for me to start worrying and get knocked out by all this anxiety. Why, God, why? We get so focused on everything but the fact that we have a benevolent, good God who cares about the situation, that of course our priorities get messed up. And you know, Jesus Christ himself really points this out in the Sermon on the Mount, of all things. He says, do not be anxious, saying, what shall I eat, or what shall I wear, or what shall I drink? He says, your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. And I love the way he puts this. He says, and it's so clever. He's so snarky sometimes, that Jesus. He says, which one of you, by being anxious, has added a single day to your life? You see what he's saying there? He's pointing out the profound ridiculousness of anxiety and worry. Because really, think about this. You may have never realized this. Worry and anxiety accomplishes nothing. Nothing. Not even a little bit. It's always negative. It always hurts. And we get so caught up. Oh, what am I going to do? We bring everyone down with us. We bring ourselves down. We make dumb decisions out of it. And Christ goes, so remind me again what you're accomplishing with all that worry. That's right. Nothing. Nothing. There's nothing. Which one of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? None of you. And I've slowly in my own way been learning how to get this right. Slowly. Excruciatingly slowly, but I'm getting there. Here's the thing. Being missionaries, my wife and I, for the last 3 years or so, has really been a crash course in learning how to rely on God for lots of stuff. So month by month, come in, and again, we're missionaries. We live off of support, and every single month we'd be behind on something. Be like, oh, we're going to make it this month, and then car bill, medical bill. Psst, psst. You guys know how it is. It's America. Every single month, I would look at, okay, what am I going to do? For hours, days at a time, I'd be so messed up. Maybe you guys don't have to deal with it as much as I do, but you all deal with it at some level or another. For me, maybe it was extreme, but I think a lot of you can relate to that thing, being messed up, because worries is taken hold of you. Every single month I would get so worried, but every single month God would take care of my needs. It's almost like he was paying attention. Every single month. For 3 years this happened. So worried. And even like going back before I was, married and on my own, was raised in a family that worked in the ministry, and often I'd hear my parents talking, and as a young child, what are we going to do? We're going to have to sell the farm. We didn't have a farm. You know what I'm saying? Every single month, and I would get so overwhelmed with worry as a child, and as if I could do anything with my worry as a 10-year-old. But it was weird. It's like God took care of us every single time. We never ended up on the streets. We never ended up. All the terrible things that could have happened never seemed to materialize. Every single time. And I keep getting worried over and over and over again. And he keeps providing it. So he's going, really? Really, Nate? I can prove myself to you again if you want. But I have been learning. I have been getting closer and closer. And now it's kind of gotten to the point. And again, this has really been a crash course for me because it's so constantly having to be overwhelmed by financial worry. But slowly I started getting it. And now it's kind of gotten to the point that I'll get hit by all this worry, and it'll be a few minutes, a few moments. And then I'll snap back and go, again? What the heck, Nate? And I'll shift my focus. I'll take the blinders off of my face and look at the big picture and consider again that I have an incredibly good God who's blessed me so much. I have a beautiful, wonderful wife, an amazing son. My life is so full of blessings, and I'm over here crippled with worry because I'm $200 low on a bill or something, when my God has taken care of me every single time up to this point in my 24 years. Really? I'm going to do this again? Take my blinders off and I look at the situation. I look at the big picture, and suddenly all that stuff doesn't seem as crippling. It doesn't seem as terrifying. And I think really Paul, just to go back to him, because I think he puts it best, he says, and again, this is him speaking out of his situation imprisoned, waiting on his death, which I think is a whole lot more of a heavy situation than not having enough for bills in the month. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let God know what you want. Let God know what you need. And the peace which God himself has will, beyond anything we can intellectually grasp, stand guard over your hearts and minds. Have you ever experienced that just for a minute? We were able to look at the big picture, and suddenly that stuff that was so overwhelming doesn't seem as big anymore, and suddenly you just... peace. Joy. And I think that's the secret that Paul talks about. That's how he seemed to get it right, despite his situation that was really, really bad. He walked in peace and joy that was stronger than all that. And he's not telling us so we can say, oh, good for you, Paul. I wish I could get there someday. He's saying that because he's saying, you can get there, and it's not impossible. You really don't have to be knocked out by crippling worry, all these difficult situations. You just don't. Take your blinders off and you consider your incredibly good God. You quit focusing on everything, little negative part of it. You look at the big picture and suddenly it doesn't seem so terrible anymore. So as we wrap this up, I'm just going to pray to end this. We'll have some people coming up here in a moment. But Father, it's so easy. You know how easy it is for us to get so wrapped up in everything but you, in every little thing, Father. And you know how destructive it is for us. Lord God, would you help us to learn? Would you help us to learn, Father, how not to do that, how to consider you and how good you are And thank you for your goodness, God. And thank you that you take care of us so much and you consider us. We're so grateful for you, Father. Would you help us to learn, God? Help us to walk in that peace that's beyond understanding and that joy that's not tied to our circumstances. Love you, Father. Amen.